You're fired. What did I do wrong? I can try harder. The words collided in the air like steel against steel, fast, cold, final. Malik Johnson stood frozen, a half-breath caught in his throat, the clipboard still in his hand. The conference room felt too small for news this sharp. He swallowed slowly, instinctively straightening his shoulders, as if posture alone might hold his world in place. Across the table, Eleanor Hayes didn't blink. Her tone was surgical, clean of hesitation, the kind of voice crafted by decades of being taught never to retreat. She sat perfectly still, hands clasped, expression unreadable. One might think she had fired 10 people before breakfast. Malik's voice cracked again, barely above a whisper. If I messed up a shipment, or look, I can fix it. Just tell me what went wrong. Eleanor offered nothing. No explanation, no emotion, only silence. It was the silence that hit Malik the hardest. He had been spoken down to before: incorrect orders, rude customers, people assuming things about him before he opened his mouth. But this silence wasn't anger or disappointment. It was a kind of calculated indifference he couldn't read, couldn't counter, couldn't negotiate with. And so he tried again. If this is about last week's inventory delay, that wasn't on me. But if you need me to stay late or it's not up for discussion, she cut in, her voice clipped, each word a blade. Your termination is effective immediately. A pulse hammered at the base of Malik's skull. He'd been through storms before, lost his wife, raised a little girl alone, worked every overtime shift he could grab, but nothing prepared him for this blindsided blow from someone who didn't even look like she cared enough to justify it. He held her stare for a beat too long, searching for something human behind the icy restraint. Nothing. Then his voice softened, stripped to its most vulnerable layer. If you have to let me go, he said quietly, please, don't tell my daughter. Let her believe her father's still trying. For the first time, something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. So quick, so faint, she nearly blinked it away. A pinprick of guilt, or recognition, or simply annoyance that a test subject had introduced something unpredictable into her carefully controlled experiment. But she crushed it immediately. This is procedure, she said flatly. It ends here. Malik nodded, though the gesture clearly cost him. He kept his voice steady, holding on to whatever dignity he could salvage. Understood. Thank you for letting me know. He gathered his things with quiet precision. No dramatic pauses, no final pleas. The controlled discipline of a man who had learned long ago that certain rooms were never built for him. Certain decisions were made before he walked through the door. When he stepped out, the click of the door sounded too gentle for what had just happened. The moment he was gone, Eleanor exhaled. Not heavily, not shakily, just one sharp release of air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She tapped her pen twice on the table, a habit she'd inherited from her father. End the matter. Move on. But she didn't move. Instead, Malik's final words replayed, uninvited. Don't tell my daughter. The simplicity of the request irritated her. It wasn't part of the test. Employees were supposed to respond with anger, blame, panic. The test measured resilience, not sentiment. Eleanor rose abruptly and paced once short, crisp steps. This was supposed to reveal character. Pressure always did. Her father had taught her that harsh lessons carved strong leaders. If she regretted even a fraction of what she'd done, then she had already failed the standard she'd inherited. Yet the irritation stayed beneath her ribs, pulsing like a warning alarm. She forced herself back into the executive rhythm. She opened Malik's file on her tablet, scanning for deficiencies, anything that would justify what she had just done. Nothing. Reliable. Commended. Never late. Never a complaint. A single emergency leave when his wife died. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Results, she reminded herself under her breath. I make decisions based on results, but the weight in her chest didn't budge. It grew. She shouldn't have looked at his service history, but her eyes caught on the military badge icon in the corner of his record. U.S. Army Logistics Support, a veteran, responsible, steady. Too steady. People who stayed calm under pressure were the hardest to read, which meant they were the most dangerous to keep. She repeated this logic twice, maybe 3 times, until it sounded like truth again. Still, as she stepped into the hallway, her fingers brushed the edge of her blazer, a restless gesture she rarely displayed. Her assistant greeted her, but she didn't stop. She headed straight for the private elevator, stabbing the button harder than necessary. Inside the mirrored enclosure, she finally faced her own reflection. Her father's training had built her into this, unshakable, unreadable, unyielding. But the reflection, staring back at her, now looked cracked. Only for a moment, but enough to unsettle her. Stick to the plan, she told herself. He was a test, nothing more. Yet, as the elevator descended, the truth whispered louder than she wished. Some tests didn't expose weakness in others. They exposed the rot in the person giving the test. The doors opened. She stepped out, spine straightening automatically, control restored, armor resecured. But the echo of Malik's voice followed her into the hallway, stubborn and haunting. Please don't tell my daughter. And try as she might, she couldn't silence it. If Malik's struggle moved you, please like this video, leave a comment to support him, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of his journey. Malik pushed through the revolving doors of Hayes Tower with the slow, measured steps of a man trying to keep his balance on a floor that had suddenly tilted beneath him. The cold Chicago air slapped his face the moment he stepped outside, a shock that made everything inside him tighten even more. He tugged his jacket closer, not because of the temperature, but because the weight in his chest had begun to spread, creeping into his shoulders, his stomach, his breath. He walked toward the bus stop, ignoring the sting in his eyes, ignoring the tremor in his hands. He had to get home. Layla would be out of school in less than an hour. She didn't need to see the storm inside him. She had already lived through enough storms. The bus arrived with a mechanical sigh, and Malik boarded, tapping his transit card, keeping his face turned away from the other passengers. He slid into the last seat by the window, staring out at the smudged cityscape passing by, the snowmelt pooling along curbs, teenagers cutting across intersections, a man walking his pit bull with a radio crackling in his jacket. Chicago kept moving. Whether he had a job or not, the city didn't stop for anyone. The familiar rhythm should have comforted him, but it only made him feel smaller. He pressed a hand over his knee, trying to ground himself. He'd been through tougher things. Combat zones, grief, sleepless nights holding a newborn alone after his wife died. But somehow, being dismissed without explanation by a woman who didn't know him, didn't care to know him, cut deeper than he expected. Still, he breathed slowly, evenly. That was one skill he'd never lost. Control the breath, control the moment. When the bus reached his stop, he stepped off and headed toward his apartment building, a low-rise brick structure heat-scarred by decades of Chicago winters. But just before entering the stairwell, Mrs. Alvarez from 2B poked her head out. "Malik, you okay, mijo? You look pale." "Long day," he answered gently. "Just need to pick up Layla. She's a good girl," the older woman said, smoothing her gray hair back. "Too many men forget to show up for their kids. You're not one of them." He swallowed. "Compliments hurt when you no longer had a paycheck to support them." "Thank you, ma'am." He walked to the school, arriving a few minutes early. The moment Layla saw him, she ran into his arms, backpack bouncing behind her, dark curls flying everywhere. "Daddy, we made paper snowflakes today." Malik lifted her, hugging her tighter than he meant to. "Can't wait to see them, baby girl." And for a little while walking home, listening to her stories, helping her glue her snowflakes on the fridge, he almost forgot the blow he'd taken. Almost. Until she asked, "Daddy, why are you home so early?" He froze for a second too long. "Just got done quicker today," he replied, forcing a smile. "Lucky me." She seemed satisfied and ran to her room. Only when her door closed did Malik finally sit down at the kitchen table. He rested his elbows on the wood, lowering his forehead to his hands. The silence in the apartment pressed around him, heavy, suffocating. He couldn't lose this job. Not the insurance, not the stability, not the schedule that allowed him to pick up Layla on time. He couldn't afford to fall apart, not now, not ever. Meanwhile, several miles away, Eleanor stood in her office staring at the city as if expecting it to justify her decisions. She had replayed the scene with Malik more times than she cared to admit. She shouldn't be thinking about him. The test was done. She'd observed what she needed to observe. She should be reviewing quarterly reports, preparing for the board meeting, assessing departmental budgets. Instead, she was replaying a single sentence spoken in a quiet, cracking voice. "Please, don't tell my daughter." Eleanor clenched her jaw and pulled up his personnel file again. The information hadn't changed since she'd read it after the meeting commendations. Long hours, consistent evaluations. She scrolled past the section detailing his emergency leave after his wife's death. Her finger hesitated there for half a second. Then she forced the file closed. "Sentiment clouds judgment," she said aloud. Her father's words, not hers, the ones she had built her entire empire on. Yet they felt strangely hollow tonight. She walked toward the window again. This time she didn't look at the skyline. She looked at her reflection. A woman of precision, discipline, control. But beneath the steel exterior, a crack, a small, stubborn hairline fracture she couldn't ignore, and it had appeared the moment Malik's voice trembled for his daughter. Annoyed with herself, she left the office and took the elevator down to the lobby. If she stayed in that room any longer, she'd drown in the echo of a man's quiet dignity. Her driver approached as she exited the building, but she waved him off. "I'll walk." "Ma'am, the temperature is—" I said, "I'll walk." The cold bit into her lungs as she strode down the sidewalk, but she didn't slow. She needed the burn, needed something sharp to chase away the guilt she refused to name. She passed storefronts closing for the night, construction crews wrapping up, a busker singing blues outside a coffee shop. Ordinary life, the kind she'd never lived, the kind employees like Malik fought to hold together every day. "He'll be fine," she muttered. "People adapt." But the words didn't land. They scattered like leaves in the wind. She inhaled deeply, forcing her pace to quicken. Power required clarity. Her father drilled that into her relentlessly. She would not let one man's fear rattle her foundation, and yet it already had. She ended up looping the block twice before finally returning to Hayes Tower. When she stepped into the lobby, she found someone unexpected waiting. Mary Douglas, Director of Human Resources, with her coat still on and a paper cup of chamomile tea in hand. "Evening, Eleanor," Mary said softly. She was in her 60s, warm-eyed, with a gentleness no corporate title had ever managed to bleach out of her. "Long day?" "Productive," Eleanor answered. Mary studied her with the sharp intuition of a woman who'd seen the rise and fall of many powerful people. "I heard about the decision this morning." Eleanor stiffened. "It was a necessary test." Mary sipped her tea. "You know, not every test reveals truth. It revealed what I needed. Sometimes," Mary continued calmly, "the only thing a test reveals is the cruelty of the person giving it." The sentence struck like a slap, quiet, but stinging all the same. Mary did not stay to watch the impact. She simply offered a small nod, then turned and left through the revolving doors. Eleanor stood there motionless, a strange pressure building behind her ribcage. Cruelty. She rejected the word. She refused it. She wouldn't let it take shape. "This is leadership," she whispered. But tonight, even she didn't believe herself. And miles away, Malik lay beside his daughter as she fell asleep, whispering a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "Daddy's not going anywhere, baby girl. I'm right here." However, deep down, both he and Eleanor had sensed the same quiet truth. Today's test had started something neither of them was prepared to face. The morning came too quickly for Malik. He hadn't slept, not really. He drifted in and out, listening to the soft breaths of his daughter curled against him, feeling the weight of everything pressing on his chest like a cinder block. But when dawn finally crept through the blinds, he pushed himself out of bed, made oatmeal, braided Layla's hair, and walked her to school with the same steady presence she trusted. He didn't let his voice shake once. Only after she disappeared through the doors did he allow himself to exhale. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. He needed answers, not for himself, but because something about the firing felt wrong. Too sudden, too rehearsed, too empty of actual reason. And if there was one lesson life had carved into him, it was this: silence meant danger. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Eleanor was already in motion, heels striking the floor with tight, purposeful steps. She wasn't headed to her office, not today. Instead, she was making her way to the South Side branch of Hayes Market, the very location Malik supervised. She hadn't told her assistant. She didn't want questions. She needed to see something for herself, needed to test the integrity of the decision she'd made. Or perhaps, though she refused to admit it, she needed to see him. When her black sedan pulled up to the store, the morning rush was in full swing. Delivery trucks backed into the loading dock. Cashiers greeted customers. The smell of fresh produce drifted out the automatic doors. It was a world far different from the polished floors and high glass of Hayes Tower. A world Eleanor rarely stepped into unless something was broken. The moment she walked in, the store manager, a balding, anxious man named Kramer, nearly tripped over himself reaching her. "Miss Hayes, we weren't expecting you. Should I assemble the team? Should I?" "No," she said. "I want to observe." He blinked, confused but frightened enough not to argue. She walked past him, scanning the aisles with a practiced, analytical eye. Employees moving carts, stocking shelves, working registers. Order, routine, normalcy. Nothing about the environment hinted that the man she'd fired had been a problem. No strained interactions, no complaints, no tension. If anything, she noticed something else, a small disruption, a gap she couldn't name, the kind of absence that lingers after someone who steadied the rhythm is suddenly removed. She watched employees work for several minutes until she caught sight of Mary Douglas, the HR director, near the break room doorway. That woman had a way of appearing exactly when Eleanor least wanted her to. Mary lifted a brow. "Unexpected visit. Routine oversight," Eleanor replied. Too quickly. Mary sipped her coffee. "You never do routine oversight." Eleanor turned away, refusing the conversation, and continued deeper into the store. In the stockroom, an assistant was struggling to secure a pallet that had tilted dangerously to one side. Boxes wobbled with every tug of the rope. Before Eleanor could intervene, another employee muttered, "If Malik were here, that thing would have been fixed already." The word struck harder than the employee intended. Eleanor felt her stomach clench. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't feel anything. Tests revealed truth. This was supposed to be truth, but the truth felt flimsy now, dissolving under every step she took through this store. She left the stockroom abruptly and walked into the break room. It was small and worn, but clean. On the bulletin board hung photos from charity food drives, most of them featuring Malik leading volunteers, his arm around staff, his daughter occasionally visible in the background. Eleanor stared at one photo longer than she meant to. Malik pushing a cart filled with Thanksgiving meal kits. Layla perched on his shoulders, both of them smiling with a warmth Eleanor hadn't felt since childhood. She felt something twist in her chest. Again, annoying, persistent, wrong. She forced herself to leave the room. Outside, she found Mary waiting for her. "You're troubled," Mary said simply. "I'm not troubled," Eleanor answered. "I'm evaluating staffing performance." "Is that what we're calling it?" Mary tilted her head. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're searching for justification." Eleanor stiffened. Mary continued, gently but firmly, "Eleanor, you didn't fire him because he failed. You fired him to see if he'd break. That's not leadership. That's fear wearing authority's clothing." The words cut deep because they were too close to the truth. Eleanor's tone hardened. "I don't need moral commentary from my HR director." "Then what do you need?" Mary asked. Eleanor didn't answer. She walked away instead. By the time she reached her car, Her heartbeat was louder than the traffic outside. She ignored it. She always ignored it. But ignoring didn't silence it. Not anymore. Across town, Malik headed to the branch as well, not as an employee, but to return his badge and clear out his locker. He entered quietly, hoping not to draw attention, but several co-workers spotted him immediately. "Man, what happened? You serious? They really let you go? This place is gonna fall apart without you." Malik offered polite, vague answers, avoiding eye contact. The questions tightened around him like a noose. He didn't want to explain himself, didn't want pity, didn't want rumors. He just wanted to get out of there. When he reached his locker, he opened it slowly. Inside sat his few belongings, a pair of gloves, his worn-out thermos, a photo of him and Layla on Navy Pier. He stared at the photo for a long moment, his daughter's smile, his wife's memory resting silently behind it. He was reaching for the picture when he sensed movement behind him. Eleanor. She must have just returned from the parking lot. They faced each other unexpectedly, too close, too soon. Malik's chest tightened. Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment, neither spoke. Malik broke the silence first. "I'm just here to get my things." "I know," she said. Then, too quickly, "I came to review operations." He didn't laugh, but something in his eyes did. "Right," she wanted to explain. She couldn't. She wanted to apologize. She wouldn't. Instead, she said, "Your performance file is strong. Didn't seem to matter yesterday." He didn't raise his voice, but each word landed with heavy, quiet truth. "I guess some decisions don't need reasons." Eleanor felt herself flinch, not visibly, she hoped, but enough for her pulse to spike. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Malik shook his head gently. "It's fine," he said, though clearly it wasn't. "You're the boss. You don't owe me anything." That sentence, so calm, so resigned, hit her harder than any accusation could. She took an involuntary step closer. "Your daughter. She doesn't need to know." His tone softened, unexpectedly. "She's a kid. She deserves to believe the world's still fair." And just like that, he walked past her, badge in hand, photo tucked carefully into his jacket. Eleanor stood there, frozen, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, the unmistakable sense that she had crossed a line she didn't fully understand. As Malik stepped out into the cold again, he allowed himself one bitter thought. Power reveals character. Today, her power had revealed hers. And in her office hours later, staring at the empty performance log on her screen, Eleanor whispered something she never expected to. Then, "Why do I feel like I failed the test?" The cold wind chased Malik all the way home, cutting through his jacket like it had a personal vendetta. He kept one hand wrapped around the carton of groceries he'd managed to buy with what little cash he had left, and the other clenched in his pocket, fingers curling and uncurling as if trying to grab hold of a future that kept slipping. By the time he reached his building, his breath was shallow. Not from exertion, but from the tightening knot of uncertainty he refused to let rise to the surface. He needed to hold it together. Layla depended on him to hold it together. Inside the apartment, warmth greeted him along with the small comfort of toys scattered across the living room. Layla was coloring on the floor, humming a tune she must have learned at school. She looked up with a bright smile, one of those smiles that was strong enough to pull a man back from the edge. "Daddy, you're home early again." "Yeah," Malik replied, forcing lightness into his tone. "Thought I'd pick you up your favorite cereal." She gasped dramatically. "The one with the marshmallows? The very one." Layla squealed and jumped into his arms. He laughed briefly, softly, but the moment she pulled away, he noticed the flush beneath her cheeks. He touched her forehead. Warm. Warmer than it should be. "You feeling okay, baby?" She shrugged. "Just tired." That was not like her. Layla didn't slow down unless something was wrong. He kept her close as he made dinner, watching the way her energy dipped every few minutes. By the time evening settled, The warmth on her skin had sharpened into something unmistakably troubling. Fever. Rising. Fast. Malik closed his eyes, steadying himself. This was the last thing he needed right now. But need didn't matter. The world never cared about timing. "Come here, sweetheart," he murmured, gathering her into his arms. She pressed her face into his chest. She was trembling. That's when he made the decision, not even a decision, really, just instinct. He grabbed her jacket, wrapped her in a blanket, and headed out. He wasn't going to risk waiting until morning. He didn't own a car, couldn't afford an Uber tonight, so he walked with her in his arms, block after block through the cold, breath after breath turning to fog. By the time he reached the supermarket where he used to work, where everything had changed, Layla's forehead was burning. He pushed through the automatic doors, drawing confused looks from the employees who recognized him but didn't know what had happened. Malik ignored them all and headed to the break room, where it was warm and where he could sit for a moment to think. He laid Layla on the worn couch, stroked her hair, and tried to calm her shaking. "Daddy's here," he whispered. "You're okay. I've got you." She whimpered softly, and his heart clenched. Footsteps approached. He didn't look up. He knew that gait already. Sharp, controlled, a rhythm made of high heels and purpose. Eleanor Hayes stopped in the doorway, breath catching at the sight in front of her. She had come to the store late, unannounced again, unable to convince herself she didn't need to see the aftermath of the decision she'd made. But she hadn't expected this. Malik sitting on the couch, cradling his daughter, a blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame, his face usually so composed tightened with worry. Eleanor felt the jolt hit her chest before she could brace for it. She stepped in slowly. "Is she all right?" Malik didn't look at her. "No. She's burning up. I was trying to get her home, but she couldn't walk anymore." Eleanor instinctively reached for her phone. "You need to take her to the ER." "I know that," he snapped before he caught himself. "I'm trying. I just—" His voice cracked. A sound pulled from a place of desperation he worked hard to hide. He didn't have a car. He didn't have support. He didn't have anything right now except a sick child and the weight of a world determined to crush him from all sides. Eleanor lowered her phone. "I'll drive you." Malik looked up finally, eyes full of exhaustion and distrust. "I don't need your help. Your daughter needs it," she replied quietly. That silenced him. Layla whimpered again, curling tighter against his chest. Malik closed his eyes. His pride wasn't worth her pain. "Fine," he whispered. "Thank you." They moved quickly. Eleanor led the way to her car, unlocking it with a tap. Malik climbed into the back seat with Layla still in his arms. As Eleanor pulled out of the parking lot, the tension in the car thickened, coiled with fear and unspoken truths. Layla whimpered again, and Malik rocked her gently. Hey, I'm right here. Daddy's right here." Eleanor tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard someone soothe a child like that. She couldn't remember anyone soothing her, either. Halfway to the hospital, Malik's voice broke the silence. "She doesn't get sick often. She's strong, tougher than I'll ever be." Eleanor glanced at him through the mirror. "You're doing everything you can." He shook his head. "No, everything I can isn't good enough. I lost my wife, and now I might lose my job. I can't lose this." His whisper was sharp, trembling. "I can't lose her." Something inside Eleanor cracked clean, sudden, and beyond repair. "You won't," she said. "Not tonight." At the ER entrance, staff rushed Layla inside. Malik followed, but before he disappeared through the doors, he turned to Eleanor. "Why are you helping us?" She didn't answer immediately. She didn't know how to. Finally, she said, "Because someone should have helped me once, and no one did." Malik stared at her, stunned. It was the closest thing to vulnerability she had ever allowed anyone to see. Hours later, when Layla stabilized enough for Malik to sit beside her bed, Eleanor stood in the hallway watching him. She didn't enter. She didn't speak. She just watched. A father holding his daughter's hand. A man exhausted from fighting battles he didn't choose. A moment so fragile it forced Eleanor to confront something she had tried to bury beneath decades of discipline. Cruelty was not leadership. Cruelty was cowardice dressed in authority. And she and only she had the power to decide which one she would become. For the first time in years, she didn't know the answer. Not yet. But the crack in her armor was no longer a crack. It was the beginning of change. By the time Malik carried Layla out of the hospital the next morning, her fever had broken, leaving only a soft tiredness in her eyes. She clung to his neck as though afraid the world might shake again if she let go. Malik whispered to her, promised pancakes, cartoons, anything to bring back the spark she'd lost the night before. But behind his voice, a deeper truth grew heavier. He couldn't afford to lose another shift, let alone a job. Not now. Not with bills already piling up on the kitchen counter like silent warnings. He walked home with Layla in his arms, the cold wind biting into his skin. Every step reminded him of how close he had come to disaster, and the bitter twist he couldn't shake was this: of all people, the one who stepped in to help was the woman who'd taken everything away from him. He didn't know what to do with that. He didn't want to feel grateful. He didn't want to feel anything toward her at all. At the same time, several miles north, Eleanor Hayes sat alone in her office long before sunrise, replaying the image of Malik holding his daughter in the ER. The way he whispered to her, the way fear, real fear, had crept into his voice. No test had prepared Eleanor for the feeling that had struck her that night. It had unsettled her so completely she couldn't bear the silence of her penthouse. She hadn't slept either. She now stared at her reflection in the office, window eyes rimmed with exhaustion, jaw tight, shoulders tense with a kind of guilt she refused to name. She pressed her thumb to her temple, as if she could force clarity into herself. She had done the test, that was all. But the test had followed her home. The test had watched her through the night. The test had a child's face, a tiny hand gripping a father's shirt, a soft whisper, "Daddy." She squeezed her eyes shut and inhaled sharply. She needed data, facts, something to re-anchor her to logic. She pulled up the HR system on her laptop. Dozens of messages flooded her inbox overnight. Direct reports, district managers, corporate partners. Her eyes scanned each subject line, but stopped cold on one. Incident report, Southside branch, video, attached. Her pulse quickened. She clicked. A customer, a white man in his 50s, had filed a complaint claiming harassment by an employee. Malik. The report stated Malik had been aggressive, unprofessional, threatening. Eleanor felt her jaw lock. This wasn't the first complaint she'd seen in her career, but something about it felt off. Too vague. Too conveniently timed after the test. She opened the attached video. A shaky, selectively trimmed recording played. In it, Malik appeared frustrated, his tone clipped. But there was no context, no beginning, no end, nothing but a crafted illusion. Eleanor frowned. She replayed it, again, then again. Each time, her irritation sharpened. Something wasn't right. She called Mary Douglas. The older woman answered on the second ring. "You're up early," Mary said, "or never slept. I need full footage from the Southside cameras on December 10th. All angles, all audio." Mary's silence was long, pointed. "This is about that video going around the internal network, isn't it?" "Just get it," Eleanor snapped, then caught herself. "Softer, please." When Mary arrived 40 minutes later, she had a flash drive and a knowing expression. She inserted it into Eleanor's laptop and clicked open the feed. The real footage played. Malik stood at the register, calm, professional. The customer slurred his words, clearly intoxicated, waving an expired coupon in the air. When Malik politely declined it, the customer stepped forward, chest puffed, invading Malik's space. Malik stepped back, maintaining distance, voice steady. The drunk man jabbed a finger in his face. Malik didn't raise his voice, not once. Security had approached to de-escalate, and Malik had walked away, giving them room to handle it. The truth was unmistakable. Malik had done everything right. Eleanor felt something cold spread through her chest, shame or anger. She couldn't tell. Mary folded her arms. You saw what you needed to see. The video he was accused with, it's a lie. Selective editing, Mary replied. Made to inflame, made to confirm certain biases people already hold. Eleanor's stomach twisted. How did this get circulated? Someone wanted it seen, Mary said simply. Someone who benefits when a black employee is portrayed as a threat. Eleanor stiffened. She wanted to dismiss the implications, but the truth lingered in the room like smoke. Mary's voice softened. You need to fix this. Eleanor shook her head. I can't reverse a termination without blowing up half the corporate structure. The board already thinks I'm too soft. Soft? Mary scoffed. You have the spine of a steel beam. This isn't softness. She gestured to the paused frame of Malik on the screen. This is justice. The word hit harder than Eleanor expected. Justice. A word her father used only as a rhetorical weapon, never a moral compass. She rubbed her forehead. If I take his case to the board, they'll say I misjudged, that I'm compromising leadership with personal involvement. Mary took a slow sip of her tea. Maybe the real question isn't what the board will say, it's whether you can live with what you've done. Eleanor froze. A beat passed, then another, and another. I made a mistake, she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. Mary nodded once, approving but unsmiling, then start fixing it. Meanwhile, Malik stood outside Hayes Market, the same store he'd worked in for 5 years, holding Layla's small hand. She insisted on coming with him. She said she felt better and walking helps. Malik didn't believe her for a second, but he also didn't have the heart to say no. She looked up at him. Daddy, are you in trouble at work? He hesitated. Something like that. Did you do something wrong? No. His voice cracked. No, baby. I didn't. She squeezed his hand. Then they'll figure it out. Teachers always do. Malik almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he hugged her, holding on a little longer than usual. They entered the store just long enough to pick up medicine and soup. 2 employees stopped him. Hey, man, we saw that video. It's messed up. We know that's not you. Malik thanked them, but the words slid off him like water hitting cracked pavement. Kindness didn't fix the damage. Truth didn't erase injustice. And he wasn't sure anyone in power cared enough to correct a lie once it served its purpose. As he walked back outside, snow beginning to fall around them, he felt it, the quiet, heavy truth that had shadowed him his whole life. In this world, a black man didn't get the benefit of the doubt. He had to earn it every day. And even then, it could be stolen instantly. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that, in a corner office high above Chicago, Eleanor Hayes was replaying the footage again, and for the first time in years, hearing her father's voice and rejecting it. For the first time, she didn't want to be who she'd been trained to become. She whispered, almost to herself, "This isn't justice," and somewhere between that whisper and the next breath, the first irreversible crack formed in the world she'd built around herself. Eleanor arrived at Hayes Tower before the rest of the executive staff had even parked their cars. The sun had barely risen, turning the glass building into a pale blue monolith reflecting a sky not yet committed to daylight. She moved quickly, like a woman trying to outrun her own thoughts. But thoughts, especially the unwelcome, guilt-shaped ones, were always faster. She made it to her office, locked the door behind her, and exhaled with sharp frustration. The full surveillance video still played in a loop on her laptop screen. Every time she watched it, the fabricated narrative about Malik crumbled more. Every time she replayed it, her own decision to fire him tightened around her like a vice. She closed the laptop abruptly. She had to talk to the board before this spiraled further. They needed the truth now, not the edited lie that was already echoing through the company. But before she could reach for her phone, the intercom buzzed. Her assistant's cautious voice followed. "Miss Hayes, the board has requested your presence in the executive conference room." Immediately. Requested. No board ever requested anything. Eleanor straightened her blazer, pressed down the lingering exhaustion on her face, and strode toward the elevator with the confidence she wore like armor. On the ride up, she rehearsed what she would say. She would explain the footage. She would present the evidence. She would argue that terminating Malik had been a premature decision driven by incomplete information. She would. The doors slid open. As she entered the conference room, conversation ceased instantly. 8 board members. Suits crisp, expressions carved from stone. At the head of the table sat Chairman Whitford, her father's longest-serving ally, a man who believed empathy was a liability worse than incompetence. "Eleanor," he said, steepling his fingers. "Sit." She remained standing. A choice. A statement. A tiny rebellion. "I've reviewed the unedited footage from the South Side branch," she began. "The claim against Malik Johnson is baseless. Fabricated. He acted professionally throughout the entire exchange." She looked around the table, searching for any flicker of recognition, any trace of concern for the truth. Nothing. Whitford cleared his throat, slow and theatrical. "We didn't summon you to discuss the footage. Then what are we discussing?" "Your leadership." The chill in her spine settled into a cold, steady burn. "My leadership?" "Yes," Whitford continued. "We've noticed inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies," she repeated, the word sour in her mouth. "Your recent behavior has raised concerns among shareholders," another board member added. "First the termination, then your sudden questioning of it. Now the HR department is whispering about a potential reversal." "HR is not whispering," Eleanor shot back. "They're reporting the truth." Whitford leaned forward. "The truth is irrelevant when perception has already formed." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. "You want to uphold a lie because it's easier?" "We want to maintain stability," he corrected. "Public relations flagged the edited video. It's being shared internally. The narrative is already established." "A false narrative, but convenient," Whitford said. "It allows us to distance ourselves from a potential threat." Eleanor bristled. "Malik is not a threat. He's a liability," Whitford countered. "A black man caught on camera confronting a customer truth doesn't matter in these situations, Eleanor. Optics do. And the optics are dangerous." The words ignited something inside her, a slow, rising anger she hadn't felt in years. "You're basing the future of an employee on stereotypes? We're basing it on risk assessment," he replied. Another board member chimed in. "Your father understood these things instinctively. He never hesitated. That was the deepest cut, and they knew it." Eleanor inhaled sharply. "My father led with fear, not wisdom. I won't replicate that." The room stiffened at the remark. Whitford tapped the table. "Once. Let's be clear, Eleanor. You don't have the authority to rehire this man without board approval, and the board will not approve it. Even after seeing the real footage?" "Especially after," Whitford replied, "because it indicates poor judgment on your part." Something twisted in Eleanor's chest, a mix of fury, humiliation, and a dawning realization. The board didn't want truth. They wanted control. Her father's legacy lived on in them. Cold, rigid, ruthless. They viewed people as replaceable, pain as irrelevant, justice as optional. She gripped the back of the chair beside her. "Are you ordering me to let the lie stand?" "We're ordering you to protect this company," Whitford said. "Terminate the matter officially. Label the employee as non-compliant. Close the file." Eleanor's voice dropped, lower than she intended. "And what if I don't?" The chairman smiled, not kindly. "Then the board will consider replacing you with someone who can make decisive choices without emotional compromise." Replacement. So that was the real threat. "Take the day," Whitford said. "Collect yourself. Return tomorrow prepared to confirm the termination." Eleanor left the room with her pulse pounding in her ears. In the elevator, she allowed her composure to crack for a single moment. She pressed her palms against her eyes, breathing hard. She had always known leadership demanded sacrifice, She hadn't realized one of those sacrifices would be her conscience. Meanwhile, across the city, Malik stood in his kitchen staring at the termination paperwork he'd finally decided to read. Each line felt more unreal than the last. No reasoning, no explanation. Just cold phrases stamped in corporate ink. Violation of conduct. Inconsistency with company standards. Final decision. Malik felt the bitterness rising again. Not loud but steady. Like a tide refusing to back down. But before the anger could deepen, Layla wandered into the room, clutching her blanket. "Daddy? Yeah? Baby? Are you going to work today?" He lifted her gently onto the counter. "Not today. Because you're sick?" He managed a small, tired smile. "No, Daddy just needs to fix some things." She nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than she should. "Then I'll help." The simplicity of her words cut deeper than anything the board had said that morning. Malik kissed her forehead. "You already do." As he held her, he didn't know that Eleanor, standing alone in her corner office, had placed a hand on the glass window and whispered something no one else would hear. What kind of leader am I becoming? For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure. And that uncertainty frightened her far more than the board ever could. Snow fell in thin, drifting sheets across Chicago, the kind that looked gentle until the cold cut through clothes and skin with a sharpness no one could ignore. Malik stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the gray morning as Layla played quietly at the small table behind him. She wasn't her usual energetic self. She colored slowly, head propped on one hand, pencil dragging across the page with absent rhythm. He watched her in the reflection of the window, the faint pallor on her cheeks, the exhaustion still clinging to her like a shadow. She had improved, but not enough to erase the memory of her trembling in his arms, and not enough to distract him from the storm brewing inside his chest. He couldn't afford another night like that one. He couldn't afford to lose his job, not when she depended entirely on him, not when every bill in their apartment came addressed to a household of two, but carried on the back of one. He turned away from the window, bracing himself. "Layla, baby," he said gently, "I'm going to step outside for a minute. I'll be right by the door. Can you stay here and finish your drawing?" She nodded without lifting her head. "Okay, Daddy." He stepped out onto the hallway, landing, pulling the door shut behind him. The cold gust that met him was biting, but he welcomed it. He needed something to keep him grounded, something sharper than the fear that had been building inside since the moment he'd been told he was fired. He rested his hands on the railing, breathing deeply. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A new notification. He unlocked the screen and froze. The edited video, the same one that had triggered the complaint. It had leaked onto social media, not widely, but enough. Enough to gather comments, enough to spread assumptions, enough to paint him as someone he wasn't, threatening, aggressive, typical. Malik felt his stomach drop, his chest tightened until he could barely breathe. All his life he had fought to avoid this, to avoid fitting into the story the world tried to write about men who looked like him. He had been careful, patient, respectful, always stepping lightly, always watching his tone, always giving people no reason to fear him, but none of it mattered. A stranger with a phone had clipped a few seconds of footage, and suddenly, that was who he was, a threat. The building door swung open. Mrs. Alvarez emerged slowly, leaning on her cane. "You all right, mijo?" He swallowed the tightness in his throat. "Just a rough day." She squinted at him, the way older women do when they see pain but wait for permission to name it. "You're a good man," she said. "Don't let people make you forget it." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Meanwhile, in her office overlooking the city, Eleanor stared at the snowfall the way one might stare at a fire they couldn't put out. She had watched the unedited footage again at dawn, watched it until the truth had carved its place so deeply into her that denial was no longer possible. She had been wrong, completely, entirely wrong, but every instinct she'd been raised with fought against admitting it. Leaders don't reverse decisions. Leaders don't show doubt. Leaders don't bend. Her father's voice echoed inside her skull. If you hesitate, you lose. But another voice, quieter, unfamiliar, pressed back. If you refuse to see the truth, you lose everything that matters. She sank into her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. The board had made their stance clear. They expected her to uphold the lie. They expected compliance, control, obedience to the image her father had built, and for most of her life, she had complied. But last night, watching that little girl trembling in her father's arms, something inside her had realigned, like a bone finally snapping back into place after years of being off-center. She opened her laptop again, more forcefully than necessary. An email sat in her drafts box, the one she had typed at 3 a.m, then abandoned. It read, "I am reversing the termination of Malik Johnson, effective immediately. A full investigation will be conducted, and corrective action will be taken regarding the false claim." Her hand hovered over the trackpad. She didn't delete it, but she didn't send it. Not yet. She needed to see something for herself first. She grabbed her coat and left the office without telling anyone, not even her assistant, not even Mary. The drive to South Side felt different today. The streets were familiar but sharper, almost accusatory, as if the city itself knew she had crossed a moral line and was waiting to see if she'd step back over it. She parked near Malik's apartment building and stepped out just as he re-entered the hallway. They almost collided. Malik stopped short, his breath caught. Eleanor froze. They stood facing each other, the cold wind whipping between them like a referee demanding distance. Malik's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something heavier. Something like tiredness wrapped in distrust. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had rehearsed explanations, logic, apologies she wasn't sure she knew how to give, but none of them formed. Instead, she said, "I came to check on your daughter." Malik blinked, surprised and wary. "She's better, but that's not your business anymore." Eleanor absorbed the blow, steadying herself. "You're right," she said, "but that doesn't change that I'm responsible for what happened to you." His jaw clenched. "You made a choice, and now I'm dealing with the fallout." "I didn't have the full information," she said. "That complaint was a lie," he finished for her. "Yeah, I know. Doesn't matter though. People see what they want to see." He looked away, staring into the gray street. "I spent years proving myself. Years being careful, years making sure nobody felt threatened by me, and one edited video undoes everything." Eleanor felt a sting behind her ribs. "I'm trying to fix it. Are you?" he asked, turning back to her. "Or are you trying to fix how you feel about it?" She flinched, not visibly, she hoped, but enough that he noticed. His voice lowered. "You don't get to walk into my life twice. Not like this. Not unless you're coming with the truth." She hesitated, then, quietly, "The truth is that I made the wrong decision." A beat passed. Then another. Malik's posture softened a fraction, just enough to show the statement landed, though not enough to suggest forgiveness. "My daughter's inside," he said finally. "I need to be with her." She nodded. "Of course." He walked past her, his coat brushing lightly against hers. Just before he reached the door, he paused. "You said you came to check on her." "Yes. Why?" Eleanor took a slow breath. "Because last night, for the first time in a long time, I saw what real responsibility looks like, and it wasn't coming from me." Malik looked at her, long and searching, as if weighing every word. Then he disappeared inside. Eleanor exhaled, the cold forming a cloud of white in front of her. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel him looming over her decisions. She felt something else rising, something unfamiliar, unsettling, and irreversibly human, the truth. And she sensed, with the quiet dread of someone standing at the edge of a precipice, that the hardest choices were still ahead. The wind had grown harsher by evening, howling through the narrow corridors of Malik's apartment building as if trying to force its way inside. Snow tapped against the windows like restless fingers. Inside, The lights were dim, and Layla slept curled on the couch under 2 blankets. Though her fever had eased, her breathing still carried a soft rattle that made Malik glance over every few minutes with rising worry. He sat on the floor beside her, his back against the couch, legs stretched out, head tilted back against the cushion. He hadn't eaten since morning, hadn't shaved, hadn't allowed himself even a moment to think about anything except the steady rise and fall of his daughter's chest. Then, from the quiet, Layla stirred. "Daddy." Malik leaned forward immediately. "I'm here, baby." "My throat hurts," she whispered. "Can we go home?" "We are home," he said gently, but the fear tightening in him said otherwise. She was pale, too pale, and the rattle in her breath was louder than before. He pressed a hand to her forehead. "Hot. Again." His stomach dropped. "Not again. Not tonight." He grabbed his coat and lifted her into his arms. She was limp against his chest, murmuring softly, "Daddy, I'm tired." "I know, sweetheart, I know." He stepped into the hallway, ready to start the long walk toward the hospital with no car, no backup, and no plan but desperation. When the elevator doors slid open, Eleanor Hayes stepped out. Their eyes met. For a moment the hallway felt suspended in time, silent, breathless, precariously balanced between 2 worlds. Eleanor spoke first, her voice softer than Malik had ever heard it. "She's worse?" He nodded with a tight swallow. "I need to get her to the hospital. Now." "Give her to me," Eleanor said, already reaching. Malik hesitated. Everything in him was instinctively protective of his daughter, of his pride, of the fragile line that separated help from humiliation. But another tremor ran through Layla's body. He handed her over. Eleanor held the little girl with an ease that startled him, adjusting her blankets, murmuring, "It's all right, sweetheart. We're going to help you." Malik felt something crack inside him. Not trust, not forgiveness, but something softer and far more dangerous. Relief. They ran to Eleanor's car. Snow whipped against their faces, stinging their skin. Eleanor slid into the back seat with Layla while Malik took the passenger seat. The moment he buckled, she called to the driver, "Street Luke's. Fast." The car surged into motion. Streetlights blurred past the windows, washing the interior in cold flashes of yellow and white. Malik kept twisting around to look at Layla. "Stay with me, baby. Daddy's right here." She blinked weakly. "I'm sleepy." Eleanor touched her cheek gently. "It's okay to rest. We're almost there." Malik's throat tightened. He didn't know how she knew exactly what to say. He didn't know why she was here at all. But he couldn't think about that now. When they reached the hospital, the doors flew open, and nurses rushed out with a stretcher. Malik and Eleanor followed closely as Layla was whisked down a long hallway. Machines beeped. Nurses spoke quickly. Doctors asked questions. Malik answered every one with trembling breath, clenching his fists to keep his fear in check. When the doors to the pediatric exam room finally closed, leaving him and Eleanor outside, Malik pressed his palms against the wall, bending forward as every ounce of strength drained from him. Eleanor stood beside him, close but not touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Malik said quietly, "I can't lose her." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a confession. It was the raw truth of a father standing alone between love and fear. Eleanor swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "You won't. You don't know that." "No," she admitted, "but I know you're not facing it alone tonight." He looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't cold. She wasn't distant. She wasn't hiding behind corporate walls or rehearsed authority. She was just human. The stark vulnerability in her eyes surprised him. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Why help us again?" Eleanor lowered her gaze. A long silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked, something fragile slipping through the cracks she'd worked a lifetime to seal. "Because I realized something after last night. Something I've been avoiding for years." Malik waited. Eleanor leaned her head back against the wall, eyes glistening in the fluorescent lights. "My father raised me to believe leadership meant hardness, distance, tests, that the only way to stay in control was to strip empathy out of every decision. She shook her head slightly. But when I saw you holding her, saw your fear, saw how easily I could have destroyed everything you're fighting to hold together, her voice dropped. I recognized myself in the wrong mirror. Malik exhaled, slow and heavy. And that makes this, what? Remorse? Truth, she said simply. The truth that I failed you. And her, he didn't answer. Couldn't. The weight of the night pressed too heavily on him. They sat down in the hallway chairs, exhaustion pulling them forward at the shoulders. Minutes stretched. Nurses passed. A distant intercom crackled. For the first time in days, Malik allowed himself to breathe without counting how much strength he had left. Eleanor's voice entered the quiet again. May I tell you something? If you want. She looked at her hands. I've never been forgiven by anyone. Not really, because I never allowed myself to make mistakes. I lived by rules that didn't tolerate them. Everyone makes mistakes, Malik said, surprising even himself. Mistakes didn't scare me, Eleanor replied softly. Weakness did. She paused. And yesterday, I realized I was weak in the worst way, blind to the impact of my own choices. Malik leaned back, staring up at the ceiling tiles. You didn't seem blind when you fired me. She winced, but accepted the blow. I deserved that. Deserving it doesn't fix anything. No, she said, but acknowledging it is the first step to fixing the rest. He turned his head toward her. So what now? Before she could answer, the exam room door opened. A doctor stepped out. She's stable. We're keeping her overnight, but she's responding well. Malik closed his eyes, a tremor running through him, relief so powerful it nearly took him to his knees. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Malik reached for the exam room door, then paused and glanced back at her. You coming in? Eleanor blinked, surprised he'd even asked. If you want me to. For a moment, neither moved. Then Malik gave a small nod, gentle but real. Yeah, he said quietly. Come in. They walked into the room together, two people on opposite sides of power, standing at the bedside of a child who had unknowingly exposed the truth in both of them. And as Layla opened her sleepy eyes and whispered, Daddy, Malik held her hand with one hand. Eleanor stood close on his other side. Not forgiven, not redeemed, but present. The first fragile step toward something neither of them knew how to name. Morning light seeped weakly through the hospital blinds, casting a pale glow over the pediatric room where Malik sat dozing in a chair, chin resting on his chest. Fingers still wrapped around Layla's small hand. He had stayed awake most of the night, jerking up each time her breathing shifted. Only when her fever finally steadied did exhaustion claim him in uneven, reluctant waves. On the other side of the bed, Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture rigid but eyes softened by hours of watching father and daughter. She hadn't planned to stay the entire night. She had told herself she would leave once Layla stabilized, but something in the quiet of the room anchored her there. Maybe the warmth of Layla's tiny hand gripping Malik's, maybe the image of Malik whispering gentle reassurances even in half-sleep, maybe the strange feeling of belonging to a moment that didn't require status, authority, or armor. But as dawn brightened, her phone began to vibrate on the bedside table. Again, again, again. She didn't need to look to know who it was. The board never called without purpose, and their purpose was rarely merciful. She answered on the fourth ring. Eleanor, Whitford's voice growled. We've waited for your confirmation regarding the termination. Her pulse tightened. Now isn't the time. It absolutely is. A rumor is circulating that you were seen at a hospital on the south side last night with the terminated employee. Eleanor's chest tightened. Someone had seen them. The board knew, and this time, they weren't hiding their disdain. You are compromising the company's stability, Whitford continued. Your father would never have tolerated this level of emotional interference. Her jaw clenched. She hated how easily that sentence pierced her. She spoke calmly, but there was tension beneath every word. His leadership is not my blueprint. It should be. He understood that attachment is the enemy of clarity. Eleanor stood abruptly, stepping into the hallway. She lowered her voice. Clarity isn't the issue here. Truth is, Malik was wrongfully accused, and a misleading video. Whitford cut her off. We don't care about the video. We care about liability. If you reverse his termination, you open this company to scrutiny, legal vulnerability, and accusations of racial bias. Her breath caught. Accusations of racial bias caused by a lie. That doesn't matter, he snapped. Perception matters. Control matters. We need this closed. Closed, she repeated, barely audible. We expect your formal statement by noon, Whitford said. And Eleanor, if you cannot make objective decisions, the board will intervene. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at her phone, heart pounding. Objective decisions. She recognized the phrase for what it truly meant, obedience. She felt her father's voice layered under Whitford's, the same cold teachings, the same ruthless expectations. Never show weakness. Never question your first strike. People are tools, not responsibilities. She pressed her hands to her eyes, swallowing the rising nausea. Something inside her rebelled violently. She wanted to march into the boardroom and demand they face the truth. She wanted to tear up the termination papers. She wanted to protect Malik not because it made strategic sense, but because it was right. But fear, old and familiar, tightened around her spine. The fear of being replaced, the fear of failing the legacy she was raised to uphold, the fear of being judged as soft, emotional, compromised. Footsteps echoed behind her. Malik stepped into the hallway, rubbing his tired eyes. Everything all right? Eleanor lowered her hands and straightened, quickly rebuilding her composed exterior. Just work. Bad news? He asked quietly. The kind of question people only ask when they already know the answer. She hesitated. A second too long. Malik's expression shifted barely, but enough to show he sensed something was wrong. What's going on? He pressed. Last night you said you wanted to fix things. Was that real? Her breath stilled. She should tell him the truth. She should, but fear pressed harder, choking her resolve. Malik, the board wants this to remain closed. Malik blinked, confusion darkening into disbelief. Closed? Meaning what? Meaning they won't reverse the termination. They won't? Or you won't? The question struck with brutal accuracy, leaving no space to hide. Eleanor's silence was its own answer. Malik stared at her for several seconds, and those seconds carved more into the space between them than any argument could. Hurt, betrayal, a quiet, bitter recognition. I should have known, he said finally. Last night didn't mean anything to you. It was just convenient timing. That's not true, she said quickly. I came because you felt guilty, he cut in. And guilt is temporary for people like you. It fades the second a harder decision shows up. She flinched. You think I don't care? I think you don't know how, he replied softly. Not angry, not shouting, just stating a truth too heavy to be disguised. She reached for words, explanations, defenses, but none came. Malik shook his head and stepped back toward the room. My daughter will wake up soon. She doesn't need to see any more of this. Eleanor swallowed hard, fighting the urge to reach for him. Malik, please. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm away, but the quiet finality in his tone was sharper than anything she had heard. I trusted you for a moment, he said. I shouldn't have. Then he closed the door, not loudly, just firmly enough to let her know she wasn't welcome on the other side. Eleanor stood frozen, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She wanted to knock, to explain, to undo everything she had just destroyed. But fear, old, insidious fear, kept her rooted in place, the same fear that had driven her father, the same fear that had shaped her into a leader capable of destroying lives with a signature. She walked slowly down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the exit, she paused, Looking back once, heart aching in a way she didn't understand, she whispered a truth meant for no one but herself. I failed him, and for the first time in her life, admitting failure didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the beginning of something she didn't yet have the courage to face. Snow from the previous night had hardened into a thin crust along the sidewalks, crunching under Eleanor's heels as she approached Hayes Tower. Her reflection trailed beside her in the dark window's sharp lines, stiff posture, a woman made of control but bleeding quietly beneath the surface. She had barely slept after leaving the hospital. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Malik's expression when he realized she had betrayed him again. No anger, no raised voice, just that quiet, exhausted disappointment, a kind that pierced deeper than rage ever could. Inside the building, the lobby hummed with early morning efficiency. Elevators chimed. Phones rang, security badges beeped. The world kept moving, indifferent to moral dilemmas and broken promises. As she stepped into the elevator and pressed the top floor, her phone vibrated, an email from Chairman Whitford. 12 p.m. Deadline. Confirm termination. Submit statement as instructed. Under it, an attachment. A pre-written public comment distancing Hayes Market from unprofessional employee conduct. A lie. A polished, corporate lie with her name ready to be stamped at the bottom. Eleanor deleted the email, then reopened her trash folder and stared at it again. Her finger hovered over the screen as the doors slid open onto the executive floor. She pocketed the phone and walked quickly through the glass corridor. Her assistant rose halfway from his desk. Miss Hayes, the board would like. Not now, Daniel. She shut her office door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a shaky breath. The truth pressed at her ribs like a bruise. She had done exactly what they accused her of, wavered, hesitated, allowed guilt to slip into her decisions. But she had also done something her father never could. She had seen the human cost. That should have mattered. That should have carried weight. Yet the board was ready to tear her down precisely because she had dared to question the cruelty they called leadership. She sat at her desk and opened the video footage one more time. Malik, calm, respectful, professional. The customer, intoxicated and escalating. The truth, unedited and undeniable. And yet the board wanted to bury it. Her father's voice echoed, cold, precise, confident. Emotion is the enemy of power. To rule, you must detach from those who serve you. No, she whispered fiercely. That's not strength, that's fear. The thought took root, grew, solidified. Her father had ruled through dominance, not wisdom, through intimidation, not integrity, and the board, clinging to his legacy, expected her to do the same. She stood abruptly and paced the room. She replayed Whitford's warning. Confirm the termination or be replaced. Replace her. Replace her. The woman who had given them profit margins that shattered records, expanded markets into underserved neighborhoods, stabilized a crumbling supply chain, and revived a brand that had been limping under her father's final years. Replace her because she refused to participate in a lie? She stopped pacing, hands pressed to her desk, breath sharp. No, they would not take her company. They would not rewrite her principles. They would not define leadership for her. Not anymore. She reopened the draft message she'd written at 3 a.m., the one she'd been too afraid to send. I am reversing the termination of Malik Johnson, effective immediately. A full investigation will be launched, and the company will release a statement correcting the misinformation surrounding the incident. Her finger hovered over send, but fear pushed back. Fear of losing everything she had built, the position she'd fought for, the reputation she had been groomed to maintain. Power could vanish with one rebellious choice. And yet, when she thought of Layla's trembling body, Malik's exhausted eyes, the quiet strength he had shown in the face of injustice, she realized something with startling clarity. If keeping power required sacrificing her conscience, then the power was already worthless. She pressed save, not send, not yet. She needed one more thing before she faced the board, a grounding, a reminder of why this mattered. She needed to see Malik. She drove to his apartment without planning to. Her hands simply guided the wheel as if pulled by an invisible force. When she arrived, she hesitated before knocking, but the door opened before she touched it. Malik stood there, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into guarded neutrality. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His tone wasn't harsh, it was tired, drained, far older than the man standing in front of her. "I needed to talk to you," Eleanor managed. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "There is." She swallowed. "I need to apologize." Malik folded his arms. "You already tried that, last night. Then you let the board pull you right back into the same lie." She stepped closer. "They threatened to replace me. And that makes what happened to me okay." His voice didn't rise, but it cut with precision. "You're afraid of losing a job. I'm afraid of losing the ability to support my daughter. These aren't equal fears, Eleanor." She exhaled slowly. "I know. I need you to understand that I'm trying to fix this." "Trying doesn't help me," he said. "Action does." She nodded, absorbing the hit. "Then let me act." Malik looked at her for a long moment, eyes searching, measuring whether she was here in truth or out of guilt. "How?" he asked finally. "How can you fix what you broke?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "By standing up to the board. By clearing your name. By making sure the truth is the only thing that remains in your file." He raised a brow. "And what about your job?" "If doing what's right costs me my position," she said quietly, "then it was never my position to begin with." The words hung between them, fragile but honest. Malik's expression shifted, not forgiving, not trusting, but something less closed than before. "And why tell me this?" "Because I didn't want to make you another silent casualty of a decision you had no defense against. Because you deserve to know that someone sees the truth." A faint, tired smile ghosted at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't dismissal. "Good," he said. "Then do it." She nodded. "I will. And Eleanor?" She paused. "Yes, this time," he said. "Don't apologize unless your actions follow your words." She felt that sentence all the way through her. She walked back to her car with her resolve sharpened, her fear burned down into something actionable. In her office an hour later, she opened the email draft. This time, without hesitation, she hit send. Then she opened a new message addressed to the entire board. Her fingers moved fast. "I will not confirm Malik Johnson's termination. I am restoring his position effective immediately. Furthermore, the edited video will be publicly denounced, and the company will initiate mandatory bias training across all departments. I will be available at noon to discuss the implementation of this decision, not the reversal of it. Eleanor Hayes, CEO." She hit send again, and for the first time since she had taken the helm of Hayes Market, she felt genuinely dangerously free. Eleanor stood outside the boardroom with her hand wrapped around the doorknob, pulse hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape. She had never feared this room. She had commanded it, shaped it, ruled it with the same cold precision her father once used like a blade. But today the air behind that door felt different. Dense, electric, a battleground waiting for her first step. She didn't hesitate. She entered. 8 faces lifted, stiff with disapproval. Whitford sat at the head of the table, jaw set in a hard line, the printed copy of her email lying open before him like a challenge she had delivered at dawn. "Eleanor," he began, voice icy, "explain yourself." She stepped forward, refusing the seat they offered. "My email was clear." "Clear?" Whitford snapped. "It was insubordination. It was correction," she replied calmly. "And truth." A murmur ran through the room. Whitford slammed his palm against the table. "You have jeopardized this company." "No," she said. "I've protected it. From unethical decisions, from burying evidence, from continuing practices that degrade employees." Whitford stood abruptly. "Your father would be ashamed." She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away. "My father taught me to lead without humanity." He led through fear, and fear is not leadership, not anymore. Gasps scattered lightly across the table. Something inside her broke open, then cleanly, painfully, finally. I made a mistake firing Malik, she continued. I let inherited instincts overpower judgment, but now that I have seen the full truth, I will not reinforce a lie. You may challenge my decision, you may even try to remove me, but I will not sign off on the destruction of an innocent man's name. Whitford leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You think you can stand alone against the board? She held his stare. I'm not standing alone. I'm standing with the truth. Silence blanketed the room. Dense, tense, alive with something shifting beneath the surface. One of the older board members cleared her throat. Perhaps we should review the footage ourselves before taking action. Another nodded slowly. Eleanor felt the axis pivot. Not enough to win, but enough to disrupt the board's once solid certainty. Whitford sensed it too. His nostrils flared, but he sat back down. We will reconvene after we review the video. Until then, this meeting is adjourned. Eleanor walked out with her spine straight, but her legs felt like iron. She kept moving until she reached her office, closed the door gently, and collapsed into her chair. It was done. Not finished, not secured, but done. And now she needed to do something far more difficult: face the man she had wronged. Meanwhile, Malik paced his living room with restless, uneven steps. He had woken to dozens of missed calls and emails, coworkers sending him screenshots of a company-wide message. The CEO is reviewing your termination. Expect further communication. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't vindication. But it was movement, and he didn't know what to do with hope anymore. When a soft knock sounded at his door, his heart stuttered in a way he immediately hated. He opened it, and Eleanor stood there, snow dusting her hair, breath visible in the cold hallway. Malik stared. You really don't know when to stop, do you? No, she said. Not anymore. She looked exhausted, determined, vulnerable in a way he hadn't thought possible. I came to talk, she said, face to face, no titles, no board, just me. Malik stepped aside after a long pause. 5 minutes, he said. Not a second more. She entered quietly. Layla sat at the coffee table drawing. When she saw Eleanor, she smiled a little, shyly. Hi, Miss Lady who helped me. Eleanor's breath caught. She lowered herself to eye level. Hi, sweetheart. I'm glad you're feeling better. Layla held up her drawing, a stick figure version of her dad holding her hand. Beside them, a tall woman with straight hair. That's you, she said proudly. Something warm and aching flickered in Eleanor's chest. Malik cleared his throat sharply. Layla, honey, go wash your hands. Dinner's soon. She trotted off. Eleanor turned back to him. I spoke to the board. Malik exhaled, bracing himself. Eleanor continued. I told them I was reversing your termination, that the complaint against you was false, and that burying the truth would be unethical. Silence rooted itself between them, thick and uncertain. Malik folded his arms. And what did they say? Enough to call me reckless. Enough to threaten me again. She swallowed. But also enough to show cracks forming. They're reviewing everything. The truth is spreading internally. Malik held her gaze. Why fight them? Why risk your job? Because you were right, she whispered. Trying doesn't matter. Action does. He stared at her, searching her face for the lie he feared, but she let everything show: the exhaustion, the regret, the fierce new conviction that had replaced the cold doctrine she was raised under. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said softly. I'm asking for a chance to make this right. Malik looked down, rubbing a hand across his jaw. It wasn't simple. She had hurt him. Twice. But he couldn't ignore what she had done now. Few people in power risked anything for someone like him. She had risked everything. So what now? He finally asked. Now, she said, voice steadying with something brave. I keep fighting, and I hope you'll let me show you I can be better than the person who fired you." Malik exhaled slowly, the tension easing just slightly from his shoulders. He gestured toward the door. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." They walked up the narrow stairs of the building to the rooftop. Snow covered the concrete in a thin dusting, sparkling under the city lights. Chicago stretched below them, endless, flawed, alive. Malik put his hands in his pockets. "This is where I come when I need to breathe. When life gets too loud. Layla calls it our sky spot." Eleanor stepped beside him quietly. "It's beautiful. It's real," he said. "No board members up here. No edited videos. No games." He looked at her then, really looked. Just truth. She turned toward him, wind rippling her hair, vulnerability softening her expression. "Then let me start here," she whispered. "In a place where truth matters." Malik studied her for a long moment. Then, without smiling exactly, but without shutting her out, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Start here." In the quiet on the rooftop, with the city humming far below and the cold brushing their shoulders like a reminder that they were still alive, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not romance, not yet, but possibility. A fragile, trembling possibility like the first warm breeze of spring daring to interrupt winter. And for the first time since their lives collided, both of them stepped toward it. Together, the next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn, long before the alarms of the city began to vibrate through the streets. Her apartment was silent, too silent for a woman who had just set her entire career on fire. But instead of fear, she felt something steadier beneath her ribs. Purpose. She dressed with calm precision, pulled her hair into a smooth knot, and walked into Hayes Tower knowing every step might be her last as CEO. Yet, strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had chosen her path. For once, it wasn't chosen for her. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, she wasn't surprised to see security waiting, not aggressively, but present enough to let her know the board was preparing for a fight. Daniel, her assistant, rushed to her side. "Miss Hayes Eleanor, there's a company-wide town hall scheduled in 20 minutes. The board expects you to address the termination publicly." "I know," she said. "I scheduled it." His eyes widened. "You did?" "Yes. And I'll be speaking, not them." She walked toward the auditorium. Each step echoed with certainty. Inside, hundreds of employees were gathering: warehouse workers, managers, cashiers, corporate analysts. Word had spread quickly. Something big was happening. Something unusual. Something that smelled like change. The board filled the front row, stone-faced. Whitford sat in the center, arms crossed, daring her to make a mistake. Eleanor stepped up to the podium. A low hum of whispers rippled through the auditorium, then faded as she spoke. "Good morning. Before we begin, I need to address something directly. Something important, something overdue." Her voice carried through the room, steady, clear, and stripped of the cold edge she'd worn for so long. Several days ago, an edited video circulated within the company portraying one of our staff members, Malik Johnson, as unprofessional and threatening. That video was false. The room erupted into murmurs. Whitford stiffened. Eleanor continued. "The full footage shows that Malik handled the situation with professionalism, restraint, and dignity. The accusation was baseless. The termination was unjust. The murmurs grew louder: shock, relief, vindication." She raised her voice slightly. "I authorized an investigation. And effective immediately, I am reversing his termination and reinstating him with full back pay." A wave of applause broke out. Real applause, from the people who worked the hardest and were heard the least. And for the first time in her life, their approval mattered to her. Eleanor lifted a hand to quiet the room. "But reinstating one man isn't enough. We must address the system that allowed a lie to spread unchecked. We must address bias, conscious or unconscious, that influences decisions. And we must ensure every employee, regardless of race, background, or position, is treated with fairness." Whitford shot to his feet. "This is inappropriate. Sit down, Richard," she said without looking at him. The auditorium gasped. Whitford froze, stunned. Eleanor continued, "I will implement mandatory equity and bias training across all departments. An independent committee will review allegations before any major disciplinary action is taken, and we will establish a support fund for single parents employed in this company." The applause this time was thunderous, emotional, transformative. She took a breath. "My father built this company on discipline and fear. I am choosing to rebuild it on accountability and humanity." Her gaze swept the crowd. "If that costs me my position, so be it. But I will not lead through cruelty." Silence washed over the auditorium, deep, charged, unified. And then, slowly at first, people began to stand, one by one, until the entire room rose to their feet. Not because she was powerful, but because she was finally honest. When the town hall ended, Whitford stormed out. 2 board members followed, but 3 remained behind, approaching her cautiously. "We may not agree with your methods," one said, "but we cannot reject results. Your leadership today may have saved this company more than you know. It wasn't approval, but it was acceptance. Enough for now. Enough to continue the fight." Eleanor stepped out into the cold air afterward, letting the wind steal the heat from her cheeks. She felt raw, exhausted, alive. She didn't know what would happen next, whether she would survive the political fallout, whether she would keep her title. But she had no regrets. For the first time, her conscience and her power aligned. And that was worth everything. She drove to Malik's apartment without thinking. When she knocked, he opened the door mid-sentence, Layla chattering excitedly behind him. "Daddy, is it the lady from the hospital?" She peeked around his leg and grinned. "It is the lady." Malik shook his head slightly, amused despite himself. "Come in," he said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an invitation. Eleanor stepped inside. Layla tugged her sleeve. "Daddy said you helped at the big meeting today." Eleanor crouched. "Your daddy is the reason it happened." Layla beamed, wrapping her little arms around her father's waist. Malik brushed her hair gently. His expression softened when he looked at Eleanor. "You really did it. I had to." "No. You chose to," he corrected. "There's a difference." She smiled, a small but deeply genuine smile. "I hope it made a difference for you." "For her?" Malik nodded. It did. The quiet between them felt different now, not strained, not heavy, but open. A bridge forming where a chasm had been. Layla ran to get another drawing, leaving them alone for a moment. Malik cleared his throat. "So, what now? You going back to the tower?" "Eventually," she said. "But I wanted to see you first." "Why?" She met his eyes, vulnerable, honest, "Because I'd like to get to know the man behind all that strength, if you'll let me." Malik didn't answer right away. The weight of everything they had endured hung in the air, but not like a barrier anymore. More like a shared history neither of them wished to break away from too quickly. Finally, quietly, he said, "We can start with coffee." Eleanor's breath caught. "Coffee sounds perfect. But," Malik added with a teasing smirk neither of them expected, "Layla approves first." Eleanor laughed, a soft, stunned sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. "Then I suppose I should get her vote." Layla bounded back into the room, waving a drawing. "Daddy, Daddy, look, it's us and Miss Eleanor on the roof." Malik raised a brow. Eleanor's cheeks warmed. And for the first time, Malik didn't hide his smile. It wasn't the end. It wasn't a fairy tale conclusion, but it was the beginning of something fragile, hopeful, and profoundly human-like justice rebuilt from broken pieces, or like two lives, long bent under the weight of fear and loss, finally daring to shift toward one another, a beginning that smelled faintly of coffee, winter air, and possibility.